All right, this is the Voice of Morgantown podcast. I'm Tyler Pepe.
And I'm Brandon Quirk, and this is WVU Sports Podcast by two suffering WVU fans.
All right, guys, we recorded 2 podcasts tonight, so be sure to check out our recap of WVU's victory over Virginia Tech. But in this episode, we are going to break down the matchup between WVU and Texas. So let's jump right into it. The Mountaineers take on the Texas Longhorns in a night game down in Austin this Saturday. The Longhorns open as a 10-point favorite, and this is going to be a huge test, I think, for the Mountaineers because Texas has a potent offense with a lot of weapons. However, Texas may be without Quinn Ewers, and the Mountaineers have an equally dangerous offense who can put up a lot of points. So with all that being said, what are your initial thoughts about this game?
If you'd asked me after week 1, I would have said this is a game, and before the season even started, that this is a game that WVU is probably going to lose. But for whatever reason, the Steve Sarkeesian area of Texas is kind of going as at least the way I thought it would go. I don't think he's a very good coach. And it's just panning out that way, where they went in against Alabama. They looked like they belonged. And then every game after that, it looked like they just didn't give a shit. There's no other way to put it. And, it's that kind of Texas program that's been bouncing around for the past at least half decade. And it's allowed teams like WVU to kind of have a pretty good experience, whether it's in Austin or in Morgantown, have a good record overall. So, even though I still don't think West Virginia is as good as what some fans are kind of saying right now after beating Virginia Tech, I think some fans saw the Virginia Tech game and saw that Virginia Tech was 2-1 and was like, yeah, we beat a good team at their place. And it was a rival. When I don't think that's necessarily the case. I don't think WVU's bad, but I think it's a game like this where Texas is still trying to figure out what works for them. And this is as good a time as ever to continue to build momentum, buy fans like myself back into the program, and, climb up the Big 12 standings.
Yeah, I'm with you. It'll be a good test for us. And going into Austin is no easy task, but make no mistake, Mountaineer Nation, WVU can win this road game because every year the Longhorns come in with a ton of hype, and every year they seem to underachieve. And here we are. Texas is sitting with the same 2-2 record that West Virginia has. So they're coming off an upset loss. They lost 37-34 in overtime to Texas Tech. And a very good question I saw on Twitter by a fellow, West Virginia sports journalist. I shouldn't say fellow because I wouldn't consider us journalists, but Mike Asti is a sports journalist who covers the Mountaineers. And he posted this question on Twitter. Do you feel better about this game after Texas lost to Texas Tech? And initially, I thought to myself, well, of course I do. They just lost. But then I thought about it a little more and thought, well, actually, this makes Texas a very desperate team because if they lose a conference game at home and drop to 2-3, their season's in trouble. I mean, it might be pretty much over at that point. But ultimately, we're in a similar situation at WVU. So I think I do feel slightly better about it because WVU is just as desperate. We've already lost a conference home game to Kansas, and we don't want to be 2-3 either. So, I feel like the Mountaineers do need to get a conference road win to kind of make up for that home loss. So I'll ask you the same question. Do you feel better about this game after Texas lost to Texas Tech or worse?
If it was any other Big 12 team other than maybe Oklahoma, I would say I would feel a little bit more worried. If all the situations were the same where, you started off high, you came down low, because I feel like programs like Oklahoma, Texas, USC, Florida, things like that, is that when things go bad, there's really no desperation there. It just collapses, and it collapses under the weight of itself. And part of that has to do with the kind of, nothing against the players, but the players that you're recruiting. They're in it for the NIL money, or they're in it for going pro, and they know that the second that they want to jump ship, there's going to be 130 schools knocking at the door saying they can come here. So, it's not really like they're fighting for anything. It's just they're at a school who, if things go right, they make a big name for themselves and get recognized to go pro. And if not, then they're probably still going to end up going pro, and they don't have to worry about it, or they get to transfer to whatever school they want to in the country. So, I think these, I don't know if you want to call them blue bloods because it's more of a basketball term, but these, monstrous football programs, their level of desperation in times like these isn't the same as the level of a school like WVU or Texas Tech or Oklahoma State. So that's kind of how I think about it. I don't think necessarily that with the group that they have and the coaching staff that they have, that there's going to be any extra energy going into Austin. It's going to be more of, let's show what we can do as individuals because this season's falling apart.
Yeah, and you might be right. Let's talk about some of those individuals because Texas, they do have a lot of weapons on offense. They have Bijan Robinson, Xavier Worthy, Jordan Whittington, and, many more. We could keep going down the list. However, the biggest question that everyone is asking is, will backup Hudson Card be playing, or will Quinn Ewers return from his clavicle injury? Because now they're saying he could return a lot sooner than originally thought. And the answer to that question will certainly have a big impact on this game. So what are your thoughts on Hudson Card possibly starting?
He did have a solid game against WVU last year. It wasn't necessarily great, but it was better than Thompson, who started the first half, I believe. But Quinn Ewers, I think, looking at what he did in the Alabama game as a redshirt freshman, and not even really truly a redshirt freshman, basically a true freshman because he left high school a year early to go to Ohio State to make $1 million. He has all the requisite abilities that you're looking for in a leader, and he's someone who can really pick apart a defense and not make mistakes. With Card, I think he's a really solid quarterback, but he's not someone that is just bigger than the game, who can win games on his shoulders alone. I think he needs the players around him to perform as well. And that's not just Bijan Robinson and Roshan Johnson and Xavier Worthy and everyone else that we've talked about. But it also is going to rely on the offensive line. And to be honest, the offensive line for Texas hasn't really been great. Looking at kind of how they've graded out here, you have one guy who grades out as above average and everyone else who's kind of right in the middle of things. So that to me kind of looks like an opportunity for WVU to take control of the game like we did last week at Virginia Tech, and that's take control of the line of scrimmage and, get in the Hudson Card's face, shut down Bijan Robinson, and see what the offense can do. Because if this is anything like Texas had against Texas Tech, where, they did a good job against Bijan Robinson, they, even though it was a relatively high scoring game, it was low enough scoring that Texas Tech could pull it out in the end, and the game was always within reach. I think WVU could follow a similar formula just by controlling the line of scrimmage. So while skill position wise, Texas is really, really good, offensive line wise, they're middle of the pack and not super impressive.
Yeah, I'm with you. Their offensive line, I was checking out their PFF scores, and yeah, it doesn't jump off the page whatsoever, really. And talking about Hudson Card, I think he's a pretty good player, especially for a backup. But obviously a healthy Quinn Ewers would be a big upgrade. But Card is more than capable of putting up points. He's proven that since he's had to start, I think, these past 2 games he started. And so the reason Texas lost to Texas Tech was because their defense couldn't stop a nosebleed. They're just not very good, and they got absolutely picked apart in the second half. Let's take a look at Card's performance against WVU last year. He had 123 yards and a touchdown, going 10 for 16 before he got injured, and they had to put Thompson back in. He's only got 2 interceptions in his career on 168 attempts. That's not too bad. So he's a good player, but if you really do some digging, the Longhorn offense seems to stall out in games that he plays in. Like I said, they'll put up points with Card, but it seems like they do it heavily in either the first or second half. And then in the other half, they just don't put up very many. For example, last game against Texas Tech, Texas scored 24 points in the first half and then only 10 in the second. And 3 of those 10 points had to be the last play in regulation. So they really, really stalled out against Tech in the second half. And so I think that's huge for WVU hearing that, because it sounds like you just have to weather the storm for the first half and then you could have some success later. But ultimately, the question is, would you rather play a healthy Card or a banged up Ewers? Because even if he does play, he's not going to be healthy. So which one do you think gives WVU the best chance?
That's a good question. I mean, I would have to think that if Ewers plays, even if he is injured, that he's not injured enough where it's a big risk to re-injure, if that makes sense. With Card, I think there's a reason why Card does falter more in the second half, and I'll dig into that here now. Looking at his passing distribution chart so far this season, given it's 96 snaps, which not a great sample size, but it's interesting when you look at it. It's kind of predictable, and it's something that's really easy to adjust to. So he is really, really good at throwing screens. 4 for 5 behind the line of scrimmage to the left, 16 of 17 between the numbers, behind the line of scrimmage, 4 for 4. But as you get further and further away from the line of scrimmage, even at between 0 and 10 yards, he's 11 of 16 between the numbers, 1 for 3 on the outside left, inside 10 yards. He doesn't really throw the ball between 10 and 20 yards. He has a total of 8 attempts so far on the season in that intermediate range. And when you look at him throwing deep, he is, I'm just doing the math here, 5 for 18 going deep. So, obviously they're going to take shots here and there, but he's really comfortable throwing the ball behind and around the line of scrimmage. And while he is a threat with his legs to an extent, it's easy as a defense to say, okay, well, we're just going to press up in the second half. We're not going to let those receivers have that space underneath, and we're going to force Card to throw the ball in areas where he's not comfortable doing it. And I think that could be a symptom as to why the offenses stall out with him a little bit. And for that reason, I would probably prefer to play Card because, if you have someone who does have a hole in their game, an area where they're just not very good, you can game plan around that. Where with Ewers, even if he is banged up a little bit, if he can get the ball out quick, his arm talent alone could really make a big difference because all he has to do is hit, 2 or 3 big passes and game over.
Yeah, and I mean, that's what he's known for. And just the short amount of playing time that we have seen from him is he can hit that deep ball. And so that is interesting. I didn't realize Card throws short that often. And that would be something you could adjust to. So it's actually all adding up. It makes a lot of sense. And the guy, honestly, that we need to worry about the most on Texas's offense is, of course, Bijan Robinson, who, I mean, he only had 17 touches last week, 16 carries, 1 catch. I know 17 seems like a decent number, but Robinson is by far their best weapon. So why are you not giving that guy 20 touches a game, bare minimum? So I honestly expect Texas to learn from their mistakes last week, and we're probably going to see a heavy dose of Bijan Robinson, especially if yours is out. So I expect to see that in the mid to high 20s. We'll see. I would love it if they didn't, but Steve Sarkeesian, he's definitely getting a lot of heat down in Texas, and for doing stuff like this will definitely get you criticism from the home fans. So the real question to me is, to win this game, is how is WVU's defense going to slow down Robinson in this game?
That's a good question. I mean, it's really going to have to be controlling the line of scrimmage, and it's not just Robinson you have to worry about either, because can start rolling with their run game. They don't have to run Robinson till his legs fall off. They have another really good running back in Roshan Johnson, who, for some way, shape, or form, I don't know, he is actually graded out as about 2.5 points higher in run grade alone over Bijan Robinson. Now he's not as highly graded as Bijan overall, but Roshan is no slouch. He's a very good running back, and even Texas fans themselves say that their two best players are Bijan Robinson and Roshan Johnson. And it's not just he's not just someone who comes in and spells. He's actually played 100 snaps so far this year compared to 175 for Robinson. So they use those guys interchangeably quite a bit. And he's a very good back. So, that's going to be the trick, is making sure that run game is shut down enough so that, you can't, that those guys aren't just wearing you out. Because it's one thing to have a running back who can carry the ball 20, 25 times a game, and you have to just worry about him when he's out there. And then whenever he takes a breather, you take a breather. But when you have two guys, you can do it. Even though our defensive line is deep, our linebacking core isn't super deep. Our safeties aren't great at tackling outside of Aubrey Burke. So if you let those two just get some confidence and momentum, they could really just wear you out all game long.
Yeah, I'm with you, and you're right. They're going to have to control the line of scrimmage, and I think the key to winning this game is WVU needs to force Texas into 3rd and 5+ yard situations and completely take Bijan out of 3rd down conversions, because hopefully if you get them in that situation, they're going to force either a banged up Ewers or a Hudson Card to throw the ball downfield a little bit to convert. And so that's really, I think, the key to winning for our defense. And so let's talk about the wide receivers a little bit, because Xavier Worthy actually got hurt in the Texas Tech game and missed the entire second half. And so that made a noticeable difference in the Texas offense as well. I mean, that might have been why they only scored 10 in the second half. The Longhorns did receive good news. Worthy's x-ray was negative, so it wasn't anything major. However, as of Monday night, that's when we're recording, I haven't heard whether he'll play or not. I'm sure they'll keep that close to the vest and probably announce it closer to game day. But what do you think the Mountaineers could do? Who are they going to put on him to slow him down if he is healthy and if he does end up playing?
That's a good question. I mean, I do think that Xavier Worthy is still really, really good. I do think that he has dropped off a little bit since his first year, where last year he was just absolutely incredible. This year he slowed down a little bit. And, part of that is, defense is adjusting to what he did last year. But, I think part of it, when it comes to WVU is that, you're going to have to kind of make a decision on, okay, am I okay with going one-on-one with Worthy and banking on that? One, he's still a little banged up. Two, maybe last year was kind of a flash in the pan and we have to stop the running game. Or do you want to commit more safety help over there and really just potentially leave yourself exposed in a certain area against the run? If I had to choose, I would throw guys at him, at Worthy, whether it's McCormick or Ajayi or Spells or Wilson Lamp or, Moon Hod or whoever, and just figure out what works, who's having success, and try to figure out, where he's going to hurt you most. So, if you're worried about him beating you on screens, playing him that way. If you're worried about him beating you over the top, just let him catch things underneath and tackle. It's just going to depend on what WVU feels they're most susceptible for him. They're most susceptible against him. So just kind of cover up your weaknesses. And I think WVU, for the most part, has done a solid job at times of not just getting beat deep all the time. There were times last year where, Baylor, for example, we just couldn't figure it out. And I'm hoping this isn't one of those games where Texas has figured a way to get Xavier where they open and take advantage of us, potentially loading up the box more to stop this running game.
Yeah. I think the best way to slow him down will be the same exact way we slowed down, Grant Wells and made him miss some open guys last week in the Virginia Tech game, is just apply pressure. You already talked about how poorly Hudson Card throws the ball downfield. So if we can control that line of scrimmage, get into his face, you won't have to cover Xavier Worthy like a glove. That'll give you a little bit of wiggle room, and maybe on some of those errant throws, who knows, maybe even come down with an interception. So once again, I think the key to winning is if we can control the line of scrimmage or not against that Texas O-line. Let's get into the Texas defense a little bit, because for all the concern that Texas's offense poses, their defense just simply does not pose a huge concern for me. And I hope I'm not eating these words next week, but if especially their secondary, Texas secondary just does not pose a threat to me at all. I think West Virginia's offense is going to have success against them. Let's look at what they did last week. Texas Tech ran 100 plays that game, and Texas's defense just couldn't get off the field in the second half. They did apply a lot of pressure to Donovan Smith in the first half, and that's kind of why they had success on defense against Tech. But Smith had a pretty clean pocket in the second half, and if WVU can provide JT Daniels with a clean pocket, he's going to have a huge day. So are you pretty confident that West Virginia's offense is going to put up some big numbers against their defense?
It's going to come down to, again, the battle in the trenches. I think when you look at Texas's defense, they have some players in the secondary that are okay. Particularly, they're good at, tackling and playing against the run. But where Texas has, it seems like all of their talent is along the defensive line. Their linebacking core really isn't anything to write home about. So it's really going to come down to, can WVU's offensive line keep JT Daniels clean? And I think they can. I honestly do, because, even though this defensive line is good, we've seen this offensive line go up against good defensive lines before. And through a combination of what they're doing, as well as JT Daniels' phenomenal pocket presence, we've been able to keep him upright and clean for the most part. And then you also throw in the running backs that we've had and the ability for us to keep teams off balance with what we're doing. We should be able to handle that. So it's just going to be about, making sure that we don't make mistakes when we're throwing downfield. And I think we have a pretty good chance of, at least scoring and having another 30-point game. It's just going to come down to, like we said, can our defense contain Texas's superstar players and stop them from outscoring us?
I'm with you. Yeah, their defensive line does have some names: Sweat, Coburn. I'm kind of blanking on their defensive end because it's not a common last name, but I know he's talented, so apologize to that kid. But yeah, it seems like that's where a lot of their talent is coming from. So if our O-line can have a similar day that they had against Virginia Tech, I think we have a really good chance of scoring a lot of points against them, which kind of brings us, to their head coach. Let's talk about Steve Sarkeesian a little bit and the struggles that he has had at Texas. If you look at his home and away record, he is 6-3 at home and 1-5 on the road. That includes neutral site games too, like the Oklahoma game. His only win on the road is against TCU in the past 2 years. So, I mean, they're not bad at home, and that is where this game is being played. But some of these things that I was finding is wild. He is 2-4 against Big 12 teams when holding a double-digit lead in the second half.
Wow.
So I mean that one really kind of blew me away when I read that. His teams just seem to fall apart. They seem to not be able to put 4 quarters together. And so the more I keep digging into this game, and I know you shouldn't be overconfident because, we got the same exact record as Texas, but the more I keep digging, the more confident I get that this is a very, very winnable game for the Mountaineers.
Yeah, I definitely think it's winnable. It's going to come down to, again, kind of those key moments and how Sarkeesian manages it, how Neal Brown manages it, and who does a better job there. And that's my big question mark is, which coach is going to be the least incompetent. And I'm not saying that to be rude to either coach, but we've seen both teams have moments where they just, whether it's a player making a mistake that the player shouldn't be making or a coaching decision that makes you scratch your head. We've seen both coaches do that sort of thing. So, can Neal Brown grow and manage a game and prepare his players so that the game doesn't get thrown away on one play? And can Sarkeesian get his team to play a full 4 quarters? It's an interesting matchup because it's a really important inflection point, I think, for both coaches. I know we talked about how last week for West Virginia Tech game was Neal Brown's job, and he won. He passed that test. This next one here, I think, is to, 1, get back over 500, 2, gain back trust from Mountaineer faithful, and 3, kind of get his program back on the right track. Beating Texas at Texas after beating Virginia Tech at Virginia Tech would go a long way, I think, to cooling off donors who may still be sizzling a little bit after that Kansas loss. And then for Texas, Texas doesn't give anyone a long leash. So if Sarkeesian gets a losing record, who's to say that Texas just doesn't fire him right then and there? It may be premature, but this is Texas we're talking about, and everything they do is premature. So really, really interesting dynamics in this game, and it's going to be a fun one to watch for sure.
Yeah, 100%. If WVU wins this game, everyone's going to be praising Neal Brown just, 3 weeks after wanting to have his job. So, but yeah, on the reverse, I mean, Steve Sarkeesian, he's 0-1 in the Big 12. And he's got a 500 record. If he drops this game at home, you're right. I mean, it's going to be the same deal. They're going to be calling for his job. So both coaches are very desperate at this point. And let's just talk about how Sarkeesian's teams, even just this season in 4 games, it's so hard to figure them out. Compare the Texas performance in Alabama against Alabama. It wasn't Alabama. And compare that game to say the UTSA or the Texas Tech performances his teams had against Texas San Antonio. Texas was tied with them at halftime at 17. They played much better in the second half, pulled away. And look at the Texas Tech game. They were up 31-17 in the second half, completely collapsed and lost that game in overtime. So, it's just wild to see that after seeing them that close to knocking off Alabama. And then they just seem completely incompetent in the next, 2 out of their next 3 games. Like, I can't figure it out. And honestly, I kind of understand the frustration that his fan base has with him.
Yeah, I feel like what happened is that they just put so much effort and time in preparing for that Alabama game. And when they couldn't pull it off, and partially they couldn't pull it off because Quinn Ewers got hurt. I mean, if he didn't get hurt, that's a completely different game.
That's a fair point too.
Yeah. And, but the next 2 games are, the next 3 games are still winnable. But it seems like they put all that marbles into that basket to say, we got to beat Alabama because that's going to keep my job safe. 1, 2, it's also going to elevate this program up the charts. I mean, even after that loss, they are still in the top 25. But it's about how you bounce back. And West Virginia, even though the last 2 opponents that we've played have been underwhelming, I guess would be the right thing to say. We still bounced back after that Kansas loss. I mean, we could have just fallen flat on our face, and instead, we're trending upward and in the right direction where Texas really isn't. And again, it goes back to, the type of players that you have on your team, the type of leadership that you have. And for whatever reason, Sarkeesian just doesn't seem to have that ability to round the guys up and say, hey, it's time to buckle down and play football, and just not worry about the noise. And for whatever reason, that Alabama loss, for whatever reason, just killed any sort of momentum and energy that football team had.
Yeah, I'm with you. I mean, you do make a good point. If Quinn Ewers plays, I mean, who knows? Texas could be 3-1 or 4-0 at this point right now with him healthy all year. But hey, that's just part of the game. Everyone has big injuries. We have Charles Woods out, and that probably changes our record right now too. So everyone's got to deal with injuries, and that's why you make the big bucks. You got to overcome stuff like that.
Absolutely.
So that's all I got. I'm super excited for this game, though. Another night game. I can't remember the last time WVU has had a schedule this exciting. I mean, we have 3 Thursday night games, 1 at home coming up against Baylor. We had 2 on the road against big rivals. Now we got a night game in Texas. You know what? Just as a college football fan, so far this season's been fun for me.
Oh, for sure. Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. I mean, I came into the season really hyped about the season. The Pitt game really didn't throw me off track. I kind of expected us to falter a little bit there just because so many changes. The Kansas game really killed me, and I'm still kind of reeling from that, personally. The Tosin game didn't do anything for me. The Virginia Tech game was like, that's cool. This Texas game, though, is one that if we get blown out, it's really going to kind of kill anything that's happened over the past 2 weeks. But if we win or we keep it close, I think that's going to go far enough. Even though Texas does seem like a train wreck, if we would lose a close game in Texas, it wouldn't be the end of the world to me. I'm sure there will be half of Mountaineer Nation who's out with pitchforks again. But Texas is still, they have a lot of really quality players. They're not a bad football team. They're just a confusing football team. And with confusing football teams, you can lose to those teams close sometimes because they do weird shit. So
I'll have none of that talk on this podcast. WVU is going to crush Texas, and we're going to go in with a bunch of hype against Baylor and fall flat on our face. And that's the Mountaineer way.
Go ahead.
No, I mean, I'm just saying. I mean, that's just typically like what we see as Mountaineer fans. Is we normally get so pumped, and then we're like, yeah, we're gonna get hyped for this huge game, and then get disappointed. But I don't know. I'm liking our odds. I really am. I think we're gonna win this Texas game, and I think we're gonna be going into that Baylor game with a ton of momentum. I'm starting to talk myself into it.
Yeah, I see that. I'm cautiously optimistic. I do want to end the podcast with a surprise segment that I'm doing just for the consistency because I've talked about it, I think, for the past 2 podcasts. And I am now officially titling this segment, "This is not a Kansas Jayhawks podcast." But Jalon Daniels, 400 yards, 5 TDs. He's an Heisman conversation, right?
The dude's amazing. He really is. I mean, WVU didn't play this past Saturday, so I was flipping between the Kansas Duke game, the TCU, I think SMU game, and the Baylor Iowa State game. I was just going between the 3, just having fun watching Big 12 football. And I'm not going to lie, like anytime I saw Kansas on offense, I would just hang around a little bit longer just to be like, yeah, what's he gonna do? Is he gonna make some incredible play that's gonna be on ESPN later? The dude is just fun to watch. I mean, no matter what you want to say about Kansas, and honestly, everyone hates Kansas basketball. Who hates Kansas football? I mean, they're almost like lovable losers who all of a sudden are 4-0, and it's hard to hate them like you might with Texas or Oklahoma. He's fun to watch. I'm interested to see what him and Kansas will do the rest of this year.
Me too. I mean, and there's two reasons I like talking about Kansas in every single one of the podcasts. One is Jalon Daniels is just a really good football player, and he's fun to watch. We mentioned this during the Kansas postgame podcast, but he just seems like someone who doesn't belong on Kansas. I mean, how else to say it? But Kansas is trending in the right direction, so good for him. And the second reason for always doing this is, WVU needs a quality loss. And I think, if we hype this up enough, Kansas becomes a quality loss.
There you go. I see what you're doing now. But hey, you know what? The AP doesn't think they're good enough to be top 25, but NC State is. So, it's not a quality loss yet.
Well, I'm pretty sure Lee Corso, who has dementia, is probably part of the Associated Press. So
Fair enough.
Said it. Everyone's thinking it.
You're right.
Right, Kansas Lee.
I kind of went from like not being able to stand Lee Corso, but now he's just like the lovable, insane grandpap of the family that you're just like, look at him. He's still doing it. Good for him.
He's still doing it. I love it.
All right. We better wrap this up before we get in trouble. We're being a little too loose with it now. It's getting late, guys. We're sorry. Yeah. It's a late night. All right. Thanks for listening, guys. If you haven't checked out the VTech recap, go and listen to that real quick. And hopefully we'll be back here next week, all hyped up and overhyping our Mountaineers like we do every single year, because that's what being a Mountaineer fan's all about.
That's right. Let's go Mountaineers.
Let's do it. Later, guys.
Bye.